action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today, I've caught Thomas Kolster, a marketing activist hell-bent on making businesses put people and the planet first. Thomas is a branding and sustainability professional who's racked up more than 18 years' experience advising Fortune 500 companies, small startups, governments, agencies, and non-profits. He's the founder of the global Goodvertising movement that's inspired a shift in advertising for the better, and is also the author of 2 books, Goodvertising and The Hero Trap, as well as a globally recognised keynote speaker and columnist for The Guardian, Adweek, and The Drum. Thomas says, "Today I've lost my belief in putting organisations or leaders on that purpose pedestal rallying for change. If you try to fly like Superman, you'll fall like a can of soup. If we are to create change, we have to put people first." Welcome to the show, Thomas.
Thanks so much, Giles. It's a pleasure joining you.
Right, here's our 7 quick-fire questions, Thomas. Tea or coffee?
Is that even a question? Obviously, coffee. You can't survive. You can't survive in the advertising industry without coffee. I think it's only because you're calling in from the UK. Who drinks tea outside the UK? I don't know, honestly.
Copenhagen or Venice?
I've actually been to both within the last 2 weeks. Venice too touristy. I'd go for Copenhagen anytime.
Right, next, Viggo Mortensen or Mads Mikkelsen?
For sure, Viggo Mortensen.
Start with why or start with who?
Now I'm gonna plug my own thing, so I'll have to say who. But in my defense, I started believing in the why, launched by Simon. But who definitely.
We got 3 more. Number 5, dinosaurs or dynamism?
There's something about dinosaurs that I kind of like. but not the types that are stuck in our office and won't let go of their old ways of doing things. But the prehistoric creatures, they were pretty cool and fearsome. So in that sense, definitely dinosaurs.
Okay, in that context, dinosaurs, good choice. Number 6, Lego or Carlsberg?
Lego or Carlsberg. This is not an either or. I think this is, as I've grown up, I'd probably choose both at the same time because it makes playing with Lego much more fun.
Okay, and finally, purpose or people?
Always people. Purpose doesn't make sense if it doesn't resonate, if it doesn't come from people, if it doesn't come from regular people's lives. It doesn't make any sense in my mind.
Awesome. Well, we'll likely dig into that shortly, actually. But thank you for joining us, Thomas. We're really a pleasure to talk.
You know what? I'm just waiting for the digging into the Lego bricks and the Carlsberg. That actually sounds like a fun thing to do on a Wednesday.
Yeah, we should say play and drink responsibly, people.
Exactly.
To kick things off then, so one call to action is, we like to celebrate the routes that people take to in their career, especially in the early stages. So as an author, speaker and marketer these days, before becoming all of that, what was your first ever job? And then what you regard to be your first proper job?
I started washing dishes at a local restaurant, and working my way up to being in the kitchen and ending up at the floor as a waiter. So that actually taught me quite a bit about hospitality that I think is worthwhile lessons that I appreciate today. My first sort of grown-up job, it probably kind of sounds ridiculous because I worked in hospitality for quite a few years, and then I made the pivot into advertising, so I probably would say that my first grown-up job would in fact be as a copywriter at an ad agency.
Nice. And how did you find the copywriting world? Like, what led you there? Was it a very intentional decision? Because lots of people obviously go to college or university or the equivalent in their country, and perhaps lack the experience to make an informed choice. So, what led you into advertising?
So see, that's the thing that's wrong with advertising today is in fact that people believe that if they go to school, advertising school, Miami ad schools, or things like that, they can learn how to do advertising, and that's unfortunately been common practice today. And I think it's bad for the industry. I think my way in was love, in the sense that I was so tired of going to university, and I was dating a girl at the time, and she could feel my frustrations. She knew that I loved writing, and her mom was in fact a copywriter in an ad agency. So she said to me, "Why don't you try, becoming a copywriter in an ad agency?" And I knew nothing about it. I, in fact, probably already back then sort of hated advertising, in fact. And and I remember she gave me this book. I'm sure you read it as well, Giles, but and the listeners as well. But Ogilvy and advertising, and and the thing that got me lured in was there's one picture in the book, and he's kind of bragging about his little kind of mansion slash castle. And I remember it said like, "Yeah, and if you're in doubt, that's my helicopter as well." And so uh, at an early age, I thought, I can write and eventually get a cast on a helicopter. That sounds like a career path for me.
So it was love that got you into it, and then a helicopter that hooked you.
Love and money, right? Love and money.
Two pesky things. Funny enough, we had our previous episode was with the great Drayton Bird, who famously of Ogilvy, and he told a story where he was giving a talk to a huge quantity of people, the majority of whom were currently working at Ogilvy, and he asked for a show of hands for those who had read Ogilvy on advertising, and a distinct few put their hands up, which he said was rather like joining the church, but having never read the Bible.
Shocker, in fact, because it's. Honestly, I think he's still worth quoting to this day. Good old David. I think he has a lot of good things that we can learn from in our industry.
And then I understand you went from that copywriting role to creative director, and ultimately to agency owner. What did that path look like?
I think what tends to happen is that I got sacked, which is a good thing. I think you again. I think if you want to survive, and if you want to not if you want to survive, then you could be the dinosaur and you could be the boring one. But if you want to be good in what you do, you need to be putting your neck out there. And so I got sacked, and suddenly seeing myself not knowing what to do, and then suddenly a former client at the former agency reached out, and then suddenly I had my first client and an agency, and that's kind of how that started. I figure like probably 7 years into my career, then I had my next little pivot because I think, as I said, introductory wise, I wasn't really, super keen on doing advertising. I kind of felt that it wasn't really that value aligned because I felt, why am I, selling cheeseburgers to people already way too fat and plucking cars in a city like Copenhagen that's already way too congested? It didn't really make much sense in my mind. But my pivot there was in fact we were hosting the climate summit in Copenhagen, and we had all the big elected government leaders there. Tony Blair was there, Obama, Angela Merkel. Obviously, she was still around back then, and still is, as long as it still lasts. But anyway, they were there, and nothing really came out of it. And so I was super frustrated about them not responding to, the climate emergency, and so I thought, what if what I know about brands, and what if some of the world's biggest brands could in fact use their power and reach to do something positive. And that's when sort of I wrote my first book at an age of 30, called Goodvertising. It was really a book about my frustration about the world of advertising back then, but also really sort of like not a vision, but more like, hey, wait a moment, what if advertising could be this instead?
Well, I must also say, without intentionally plugging previous call to action guests, but we had the great Steve Harrison on a few weeks ago on the show, and I'm a huge fan and friend of Steve's, and it's worth saying that despite Steve's stance on how people understand and perhaps practice purpose from a brand purpose perspective, he has referenced Goodvertising in his book Can't Sell, Won't Sell as a seminal piece. So I think that's quite applauded in my book.
God damn it! And I actually didn't know that. So I definitely have to give him a heads up. Yeah, no, that actually means a lot to me, because I think the one thing, the one reason I keep doing what I'm doing is, in fact, to hopefully inspire others. Yeah, so I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, well, in fact, if you weren't aware of that, he's actually written, he's relaunched his book Can't Sell, Won't Sell in recent weeks, and in the new chapter, he actually again points people towards Goodvertising. And I've read the book, and I think it's the only real reference he makes positively about the evidence that purpose can be commercially very effective. So it's both a plaudit and also an important caveat that he references a couple of times. So I think that's certainly worth noting for our listeners.
Yeah, it's always crazy to look back at those early days, because put yourself in my feet. I was young, I was frustrated, and I sort of used a book as because it's really not that original if you think about it. I'm a copywriter, I write a book. Uh, so so I think I was just enough frustrated to write the book at that time, before purpose and before this whole thing really became the thing that it is today in our industry.
Yeah, well, and without, I've actually just written the word frustration next to the word love as the two kind of key, what are the words, drivers, I suppose. One that got you into advertising, and one that led to you writing the book about it. But Goodvertising was released in 2012. Now, I don't mean to necessarily fast forward 8 years without talking in a bit more detail, but the opening line of the introduction of your newer book, The Hero Trap, is, I was wrong about purpose. All these years I had been asking the wrong questions. So can you tell us why? Why were you wrong about purpose, and how were you wrong about purpose?
You know what? I mean, the thing is, yeah, the book came out in 2012, but obviously writing a book takes time, and a lot of the research and stuff like that was probably 2010. So for me, it feels like a decade ago for me, and a lot of the work and cases is really a decade ago. I think what has changed is, in fact, that back then there was very few cases of brands standing up for anything besides just plugging products, in fact. So I remember we had, with the research team, we had access to CAN, we had access to all these different archives at the time, and it was tough. It was tough to find examples of purposeful brands. But what suddenly I realized 3 years ago, so my light bulb moment, obviously, for the first book was the climate summit, and this time around it was something different. It was in fact my own inability to create the change that I wanted to see in my own life. At a trip to Spain, I realized, damn it, it's actually really, really difficult to create change, and I'm sure it's something you can recognize from your own life. And so I started asking myself a completely different question, because I noticed now, with every brand kind of trying to embrace purpose and shouting from every rooftop, oh, we care about ocean plastics, we care about climate change, and whatever nonsense they're putting out there. I thought, what leader or brand organization have in fact created positive change in my life? And the list was super short. And so that was sort of what provoked me. to take a new look at this whole purpose field, and say maybe we need a new way forward, because it does seem like the current approach makes people even more skeptical. The current approach, and we see missteps from brands all the time, seems not to be working in the long term.
Yeah, and there is I suppose, a misuse of sorts, or claims of sorts about purpose, which it doesn't take. If you scratch the surface, you can see perhaps isn't really authentic or particularly true.
I mean, the whole thing for me, I think the whole thing is about leadership. In fact, I think people get this notion wrong. I mean, that suddenly, I mean, I think we haven't learned anything in branding over the years. In fact, I think we still build these megalomanic brands that are super self-indulgent and super self-important. And that just becomes worse when you enter the space of doing good. Because, I mean, if a brand pits itself as a hero, I mean, heroes are extraordinary. Mandela, Mother Teresa, and Jesus, they're extraordinary human beings, whatever your beliefs are, anyways, but because they're exceptional. And I think that's the worst thing, is in fact that you build these brands that all claim to be exceptional and play a pivotal world-saving role in our lives. And I think that's BS. People are simply just not buying it. I think this, navel gazing way of looking at your own leadership with, the question that, especially Simon Sinek is famous for, the start with why, becomes actually quite a self-glorifying exercise. What are my values? What do I believe in? I'm the centerpiece of change. Whereas what I wanted to, and what I witnessed was, and what I believe in, is in fact that the best leaders in my life have been the leaders that made me grow, that made me experience new sides of myself, that make me, you know, take new choices. And so basically, by asking a fundamentally different leadership question, who can you help people become? I do think that we can shape a new, exciting, and in fact more purposeful leadership. In the book, I call it, not a purpose, but a transformative promise, because it's almost like purpose is a word that's too good for its own good.
Yeah, and as a collective, it's very hard. I had the pleasure of guesting on Mediacom's Connected podcast a few weeks ago, and one of the hosts, who is a good friend and very talented, very smart guy, Andrew Spurrier-Dawes, he knew that I had a problem with Simon Sinek's Start With Why, and he was trying to prod, he was prodding me for a reaction. And I think the point I made, I hope I did anyway, is that I have no issue with it individually, but I think as a collective, to use your words, it can be quite a self-glorifying exercise, and therefore not necessarily true. What I wish I had said in hindsight, having read The Hero Trap, is they need to start with who. But of course, you've just explained that stance, and it makes a lot more sense.
No, but I think the thing is as well. I mean, if you look, I sometimes like to just pick out Patagonia because everybody's always talking, so nicely about the brand. But if you really, and maybe it's just me being a copywriter, so I take words literally, right? So, if they say we're in the business to save our home planet, that's basically their purpose, right? What self-glorifying nonsense is that? Honestly, I mean, yeah, you you make T-shirts for people who live in a one-bedroom apartment in London and wish they were more connected to nature. That's what you do, and kind of taking on this world planetary saving role. It's just too much. It's too much. In some aspects, yes, Patagonia can get away with it. They're one of those sort of weird outlier brands that can break the regular brand rule book. But when you suddenly have companies like Unilever and others kind of trying to copy paste that recipe, it just becomes wrong. We suddenly have all these kind of super self-important world saving brands, and on the other side we have people like my niece Clara. She's 15. she grew up in a fundamentally different world than my parents. I mean, my parents, middle class, they looked at companies and brands as the ones that, sort of delivered prosperity and gave, cars and Tupperware to the middle class. They got a lot of new stuff. That's great. But in Claire's world, she looks at these brands as the one to blame for cutting down the rainforest, for social injustice, all this stuff. And she just look at these companies like, what the heck are you talking about? Saving the world? What, what a load of BS, right? And I get it, because my thing again, that goes back to the question, you know, who's really creating change? And then everybody says, oh, it can be about story doing, it's about actions. Hell no. The proof point for me with who can help people become is the transformation you create in people's lives. And I like to bring it back to relationships, and you're actually catching me on the wrong day, because my girlfriend and I just split up yesterday. So, but yeah, that does happen. So it's fun for me to talk about relationships today. But there's only so much you can say in trying to save a relationship. Sorry, honey, I'm gonna do this differently. Yeah, I know I should put the toilet seat down. At one point it comes to actions. So then you're gonna prove that, yeah, I do remember putting those toilet seat down, or you buy roses or whatever. But at the end of the day, the real proof point is how you make her feel, who you help her become. Do I truly make her feel more loved, more appreciated? Do I actually make her grow? If not, I'm failing. And the same goes with brands.
I found that really reassuring when you talked about Clara and her ability to question brands that are responsible for doing bad things, which, however we can kind of loosely define it. And there's a couple of references in your book as well, which actually makes that exact point, that younger people today do have this wonderful inherent bullshit filter that is much harder to get past.
I love it. I love it. I mean, honestly, because what are companies doing? Yeah, they're doing a little bit less bad.
Yeah, less bad doesn't equal good. That's the thing, isn't it?
You're not a saint. I mean, no, honestly, the Bible was written for a reason, because it portrays the extraordinary, fictional or non-fictional, whatever you believe in. That's not my business. But journey of one guy who does extraordinary things. I mean, honestly, you know, Unilever, Patagonia. Do you think you're doing exceptional things? Hell no, you're not. So, and I'm partly to blame, because in my first book, but obviously it's been an evolution. It made sense back then, because you could differentiate your brand easily by being the Ben and Jerry's and the Doves of this world. But obviously today, when there's so many around who puts on the hero cape, you're running into the hero trap.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good way of defining any issue that I think historically I've had with brand purpose, or how brand purpose is used as a kind of smoke and mirrors exercise, where it's this kind of pseudo purpose that brands have. But I personally struggle to understand where the line is between that and commercial purpose, and I wonder where you sit. So, just to go back, without meaning to bang on about Steve Harrison, but he makes a great point in his book about commercial purpose and how that takes a precedence. And he says it's important that we remind ourselves that every time someone buys something we've advertised, whether that's a car or a burger or whatever it might be, to use the references you made earlier, we enable someone else to get paid, and not just the person in the shop where it was purchased. That sale pays the wages of the person who made the thing or grew it, the person who packaged it, the person in the warehouse where it was stored, etc., etc., etc. So there is almost an existing commercial purpose that does do good. And I think the lines can be so easily blurred and difficult to see between that commercial reality and the brand purpose as people might understand it today.
I completely agree, and I think it's because, unfortunately, most brands today look at purpose as some higher value crusade. And I mean, I mean, some of the purposes, I mean, are things like, do good for people and planet, or something. How are you gonna how are you gonna navigate after that? What's the compass derived from that? But I think my thing is, in fact, that I think where brands and businesses fail is, in fact, if they don't play a meaningful role in people's lives. That's where they fail. That's where purpose don't necessarily can rescue them. So I think as soon as you begin your leadership and your mission as a company with who you can help people become, you automatically puts value at the center of what you do. And when you do that, obviously it does have commercial value. I mean, if you take Discovery, the health insurance company, their purpose, or I call it transformative promise, is incentivizing people to live healthier. When they deliver on that on a day-to-day basis, people do become healthier. When people do become healthier, they pay less in premium and they have a more profitable business. And it's more, it's not a transactional relationship anymore. There's this sort of weird, interrelationship where interdependence, and even people within Discovery can relate to this, right? So I think that's the pivot that needs to happen, and that's the realization I had, interviewing, leaders in big organizations, small organizations, and startups, and that's what made me super excited about this possibility to change leadership from within.
Yeah, with that Discovery example, it sounds like there's a real alignment there.
It does, but even, I mean, I spoke to one of the smaller brands. I spoke to two guys, Tom and Max, in the late 20s, and they created a company basically selling running glasses. I think they came from the fashion business, and they looked at running glasses and they were like, "What the hell? It looks like something out of what Schwarzenegger's wearing in Terminator, right?" I mean, it's sure they were fashionable at the time, but it's like they're just stuck in that like dinosaur time pocket. We use the dinosaur in here, but anyway, so they wanted to make them more fashionable. But those two guys had a lot of insight because they've been on a journey themselves where they loved running, but they started practicing yoga along with running, and so in the launch district question, it was really about a community of people who believed in mindful running, and by doing that, they're suddenly selling a transformation that's bigger than the running glasses. But in essence, the running glasses are the tools, and those are sort of the examples that I was inspired by, and where I felt that as soon as you figure out the meaningful role they want to play in people's lives, you suddenly have a potentially thriving business, because when you help people grow, they'll automatically grow your business.
That's a really good example, those two guys you just referenced. And you make the other reference to a guy, I don't want to butcher his name, but I believe he's called Dave Hackens, if I pronounce his surname.
Exactly.
I think he's now at Alphabet, isn't he? He's now part of Google, but he started again with a very set idea and mission. You talk in the book about me as the new mass, and you make the point that it's not even David with a sling anymore, it's many Davids with many slings. So it's great to hear these stories of these small founder-run businesses that have this opportunity to take on the world, if you like.
I mean, Dave is I met Dave. I hosted him in Copenhagen some years ago, and I mean, he was a young guy, uh, Dutch guy, just more or less out of school, right? And he has this fantastic notion of leadership because he doesn't really see himself as a leader per se. He's just one of the community. He's part of the community, right? He's there to lead from behind. In fact, I mean, he enables other people to grow, and he's done that with both his businesses. The first one was called Phone Blocks, an amazing idea, which was about why do we have these phones that are obsolete from the very beginning? I mean, if I break my iPhone screen, it's super costly. At least I can change that. But if something else breaks down, I can't. So we really created a modular phone, pretty much like a Lego brick. And the whole idea was around community. It was around the ones who are best at building a camera from the phone can do that. And his second venture that he launched a couple of years ago is called Precious Plastics. And it's basically these do it yourself machines that you can feed with PET plastic bottles that you can collect, and it creates these granules that you then can make lots of exciting things out of. And he's helped that grow across the world by again having this super grassroots, enabling, empowering way of looking at what needs to happen. And I think this is where marketing gets stuck, because marketing and most marketeers still believe they're in control. And and quite frankly, it becomes a little bit embarrassing. You know, it's like your mom and dad not wanting you to grow up when you're like a teenager and you're like 15, 16, and they keep hugging you and they and they want to decide everything, you know? It's like, mom and dad, I know how this is done. You know, I, I can do this. And you know, even today, I mean, I'm embarrassed by most brands, the way they run Instagram. I'm embarrassed by most brands today that insist on their way. I mean, why the heck do the hotel, when I'm checking in, why do they need to decide X, Y, Z? Why can't it be up to me how I want my service to be? You know, it needs to be on my terms, and most brands still grapple with that. They can't get their heads around it. That it's a new generation. They're used to designing everything with the click of a button, and they still go this old mom and pop's way. You know.
You're so right. There's so many. I think some industries are probably much worse than others at kind of adapting. But I had a great chat with a good friend of mine, Colin Lewis, who's a brilliant marketer, probably a couple of years ago now, and he gave the example of he was looking to switch banks. And he went into I can't remember who it was, but it's probably irrelevant. It's, you know, historically quite a big bank in the UK. Now, Colin doesn't like filling out forms. So he said when he got to the front of the cashier, he said, "Look, I want to open a bank account with you, but I don't want to fill out any forms." And the lady said, "Well, that's just impossible." He said, "Well, no, it's not." And she was adamant he had to fill out a form. So he just walked away and he found a bank that would let him set up an account without having to fill out a form. And it was just, your story just reminded me of Colin. And it's just such a breath of fresh air to know that he found a bank that he could just easily open an account. But you're right, it's everywhere. It's hotels, it's banks, it's airlines. You're right. It needs to be on the customer's terms.
It does, and there's a second thing in it that goes, you know, much deeper. It is in fact that, you know, for some reason, you know, economists and have kind of made us believe that what makes all of us tick is things like money and status. And I know that I talked about, obviously, with David being pulled in there by the money, but there's something that runs much deeper, and that's obviously, you know, what we're passionate about doing, and that essentially we want to call the shots. You know, if you think about it, when people are on death row, the last thing they get to decide, they get taken away all liberties, can't decide anything, but their last little thing before they leave this planet is to choose their meal. It really shows how important it is for human beings to call the shots. And there's nothing worse with leaders today that come there and like put a bunch of papers at your desk and like, you know, fill this out this way, and you know, and and essentially we know that, and yet marketeers, through everything they do the opposite. They don't give us choice. They don't make us decide. And and so when we see, you know, engagement numbers dropping online, etc., it's because we don't open up for people's creativity and passions, and it's a missed opportunity. And I think it does show that some of the fast growing brands in this world get it. I mean, look at Avis, right? Avis Avis is built around an old model where if I want to rent an Avis car in Copenhagen, I need to get up on my bicycle, I need to drive down to the Avis office. I have to wait in queue, probably have to fill out a form as Collins, and I don't want to fill that shit out either. Sorry about cursing. And then I have to wait for a guy to pick up the car, drive it to me. I get the car, I leave. When I'm finished renting the car, I have to go. It's just so cumbersome, right? And now with things like Drive Now that was launched by BMW, I can pick up a car wherever I want. I use my phone, I open the car, I leave it wherever I want. It's on my term. And so so I think, there's so many disruptions that could be done. And even we did it just at the back of the pandemic in March, April, like everybody else, we are launching webinars. We put a price on them and, with tons of discount codes and whatnot. But obviously that space got extremely clouded very, very fast or crowded very fast. So, it was tough for us to get the same amount of people attending as we did in the beginning. And then I was like, wait a moment, we forgot to take our own medicine. Why don't we let people decide what they want to pay? Exactly. So on the website, we just said, if you want to pay zero, that's fine. Eventually we'll go bankrupt, or at least won't be able to produce this content for you. If you want to pay 59, it's break even. If you want to pay, and the fun thing was we got more paying customers. And the one who didn't pay, we ended up converting 15% to either the next webinar and paying for that, or books or something else. So we need to, yeah, we really need to understand that we need to put people's lives first, and we really need to fundamentally change the way that we look at leadership and the way that we put that leadership to work in our organizations, and the way that we activate our marketing efforts pretty much across the board.
Yeah, and I think a central point that you've been talking on there is about choice, and choice is so powerful. And there's two examples. I mean, one is I'm talking to you now from my agency Gasp's new office, which is a mixture of remote working and on site for our team, which was a choice that they were very much in control of. Another instance that this has reminded me of is when I was interviewing Rory Sutherland a couple of years ago. We had a listener question in from a parent, and because we'd been talking about psychology and behavioural nudges and heuristics, the question was centred around, well, how can I use that as a parent? And I've tried this, by the way, as a dad of two young daughters. And Rory recommended people use placebo choice, so basically just a fake choice so that the other person feels like they are in control. And he said, if your children are, say, I don't know, trying not to go to bed or refusing to go to bed, you just give them a placebo choice. So you say, well, you either go to bed and you can read a story with me, or you can go to bed and you can have an audiobook. And I've tried this at least a dozen times, and it has worked every single time because my daughters feel like they're in control, and they choose. Both choices obviously have the outcome that I want, which is them going to bed, but there's an element of choice there which makes it much more attractive, and it's wonderful. I highly recommend it.
I really do love that example. And you know what? I think there's so many examples around, in fact, in business, like Build a Bear, like even if you look at the business model behind IKEA, right? At the face of it, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, how IKEA operates today, because people have tons of money, or at least, some people have a lot. On average, people have a lot of money in our part of the world, at least, right? So, but what people don't have is time. And so it's really crazy to have a business model where the things are sort of cheap, but they demand a lot of effort from you. And the only reason that could be explained is, in fact, that a guy like me can somehow try to live up to these old sort of masculine values around, a guy kind of have to be able to put a wardrobe together, whatever else it is. And there's a bit of a challenge in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. So in terms of like the future of, I mean, I suppose this kind of straddles everything, all business. It's not just marketing. But how do you view the future of marketing with everything we've said in mind? Do you think, you know, the big agency days are numbers? Do you think they need to adapt or die?
Well, I think there's so many. I mean, it's not an easy time to work in advertising, but I'd say that's probably not a more exciting time either to work in advertising. Um, I think there's so many challenges. First of all, I think we're stuck on this sort of industrialized model that even though we pride ourselves in creativity, I think most agencies are sort of just like a fancy looking sausage factory in this. No, but honestly, in the
Yeah,
sense that
yeah,
a client arrives with a brief, and out comes the sausage. If you're lucky, it's purple, or it's like if you've been really, really inventive, it might be rainbow colored, right? That's
yeah.
about No, but that's about the level of creativity we put into brands today. And it's such a shame because I think still what we as an industry deliver is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing. It's the relationship between people and a company. It's that meaningful role. It's the future success of a business that we can help build, shape, and nurture. And so I think our industry is as relevant as ever, but I think we've just unfortunately lost our self confidence, and all we do right now is just go back to the sausage factory and do shitty adverts at a lower price, and leaving the excitement to the world of startups, leaving the business case, because none of us have had the guts to actually talk about how important brands are, to the likes of consultancies. So I think we're in this sort of teenage phase. We don't really know what we are. We're trying to find our ways, and it's a
Mm.
shame.
Yeah, one of the first things we spoke about your book Goodvertising, and I referenced it was published in 2012. But of course, in your head and in your experience of actually writing it and basing it on case studies and things from the past, you rightly corrected me as it being something that, you know, in your head was a decade old, and it was 2010. And maybe nowadays, working in agencies, we are too often guilty of thinking that we're more modern than we are, when actually we're in this kind of ongoing cycle that's been going for years of step and repeat, whether we're churning out sausages or whatever. And actually, we need to wake up and look around us a bit more.
I completely agree. I think by the end of the day, it's about self confidence as an agency. I mean, where do you want to be in the value chain? I mean, if you end up if you end up just being a production company, sort of just putting out ads there, and not nurturing and building meaningful brands, what's the value? And so and another thing is I think we've lost the battle of attracting the brightest minds. I think if you're out of business school, if you're a passionate creative person today, you don't go into advertising. You want to work for a startup, or you want to create your own startup or whatever, or go work for Netflix, or who knows. But advertising just isn't as sexy anymore. And as I touched upon earlier, like in the beginning with talent, I think creative industries shouldn't be about schooling people around creativity. I think our industry needs to be much more open, as it used to be when I grew up in the industry.
Yeah, good answer. I have a couple of listener questions for you, Thomas, if I may.
Oh yeah, please.
So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. And we have two, as usual, starting with James. Now, we may feel like we've addressed this earlier on, so feel free to say if we've answered this. But James, who's based in Manchester, asks, was there a specific brand social purpose campaign that was a tipping point that made you believe you had got purpose wrong?
You know what? It's interesting because like naming a book, it's tough, right? And I ended up calling it the Hero Trap because it was like it was almost like the opposite of Goodvertising, and there was something exciting in putting something nice together with something, a hero and a trap. Because I think what really provoked me was, in fact, that I just witnessed these hero traps again and again. I think there was really one example, but there was so many, and there was even some of the brands that I looked up to, like Chipotle, you know, like Volkswagen. A lot of the cases in my book turned out to be hero traps, and what a shame! What a shame! What a missed opportunity that you had brands that sort of, were on the right track per se, but sort of jeopardized it.
Yeah, and had the opportunity to do so much good and did the opposite, maybe.
And did fail. I mean, I don't know if you watched this year's Super Bowl ads. I'm sure you did watch some of them. But I mean, looking at some of the work that Chipotle have been doing over the years, like the Cannes Lions Grand Prix winner, the little animated, what was called Back to the Start. Beautiful piece of work. I mean, I still get the chills when I watch that. And then this year, you watch the commercial, "Can a burrito save the world?" Which just a sloppy left hand, lazy advertising work, full of corporate BS. So I think it was the accumulative effect of witnessing all these brands running into the hero trap. That's what sort of provoked me as well to take a hatchet to some of my earlier beliefs and the way that I thought we should shape meaningful brands.
Question two, funny enough, question two is from Emma in Derby, and our copywriter Mark here actually had a very similar point when we talked about Copenhagen. So this is probably an easier one to answer. Well, I say that actually. Let's find out. She says, "I love Copenhagen, but why is it so expensive? Can you recommend a nice spot where I can get a reasonably priced beer?"
Oh yeah, Copenhagen is definitely becoming more and more expensive. It's sometimes I sometimes have to. What a privileged part of the world that we live in, and what a and that should come with a hell of a lot of responsibility, in fact, but that was not the point here. I mean, where would I go for a cheap beer? The thing about Copenhagen is still, even though there's so much gentrification that's been happening across the city and then obviously across all cities, in fact, in the world at this time, you can still find your like little bars. I'd probably say that there's a place like it's called Lille Øresund, which is a little pub where you still can go in and you can get a beer for 15 crowns, which is probably the equivalent of 1.5 pounds. There's still those places around, and it's also a sort of a cultural view into how Copenhagen life used to be, with these pubs and blue collar workers coming after work and going in there and sitting there, and so that's they're still around. You'd have to look around, Emma.
Perfect. The final part of the interview then, Thomas, is our four pertinent poses that we put to all of our guests. Starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I would probably tell myself, be generous, share more. Um, because I think when you grow up in the industry, you have this idea that, oh, my idea is, so original, I'm going to keep it to myself, almost like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, right? My precious, that like like if I was some sort of messiah that invented something really extraordinary, and I back then it was like that. Today I just know my ideas become much better, my work becomes much better when I share it with other people, when I'm generous towards other people. And so I would probably have loved to tell a younger Thomas, take a chill pill. That's a lousy idea, but if you might share it with other people, it could potentially become sort of okay.
Yeah, I really like that answer. I think we are episode 72 or 73 as we record this, and that's definitely not come up before, so that's a great one. Great one. Number two, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
One thing, advertising.
You ban it.
You'll have to reinvent yourself, guys. They're already banning fast food ads and gambling and stuff. You'll have to reinvent yourself, and when you reinvent yourself, you'll focus on building brands. So quit fucking advertising. It's hurtful for society altogether. Focus on building brands.
Good stuff. Okay, number three, any books that you can recommend to our listeners? We will, of course, link to Goodvertising and The Hero Trap. Are there any others that you can recommend?
Yeah, skip those other two. You can you can probably Google the main essence of it. Who got time to read anyway? You know what? Sometimes and now, and it's a bit annoying that I can't remember the author right now, but I love children books because I think children books just deal with the very nature of our human being, and children just have this capacity of questioning, everything. And there's this book, and I'll have to find the title in English, but in Danish it's called Spørgejern, so it's really not helping you, but I'll send it over and I'll Google it. But it's really this story about a kid who keeps, posing questions to everything he sees around him, and I think it's something you'd recognize with your kids as well, right? And I think it's just such a valuable thing to remember throughout life. It is, in fact, to keep asking questions, and really kind of questioning whatever is happening around us. And so for me, it's still one of those books that I love because it's simple, and it's still yet so thought provoking.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I completely echo your point there on kids asking questions. And in fact, regular listeners to Call to Action can skip the next 10, 20 seconds as I retell the same story I told in the last episode. But my daughter Annabelle, who is 5, she regularly tells the sky off, or no, tells the moon or the sun off because it's still in the sky and it's the other one's turn. So she's leaving for school and the moon is still there and it's the sun's turn. She gets angry with the sky.
But see how lovely that is, or like why are you drinking beers if you next day wake up and are not feeling great? Like, yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
It is. It completely is. Yeah.
It makes no
And
sense.
it's great because no, exactly. And the kids haven't learned how things are, and so they question everything, and that's what's so important, isn't it? Another thing that kind of gets numbed over time as you grow up. You either become fearful of asking the obvious questions, or you just you get used to the way things are asked. So that's a great one. And number 4 then, Thomas, is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give the reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode to somebody?
That's a really tough one. You know what? I'd actually dedicate it to and sometimes I'd actually dedicate it to Nelson Mandela, because I think he's he's one of those lighthouses that we truly could learn something from in these extremely divided times. His whole idea about, sort of unification and accepting differences and overcoming all these obstacles. I think he would probably be the guy to post-mortem dedicate this episode to. Uh, um, especially I think in these days with brand activism and all that's going on, we need sometimes to kind of look back at some of his work and some of his words and let them soak in.
Yeah, I think that's a great dedication. And I also think in light and in context of your point earlier about, well, I suppose the whole ethos of the hero trap and brands pretending or at least believing they're heroes, to dedicate it to Nelson Mandela, a real actual true hero is a great thing. There's a quote from the hero trap that actually I didn't get to share. I'm going to share it now because I love it. And it's if you asked a psychologist to evaluate most brand purpose, I guess the diagnosis would be somewhere between megalomania or delusion.
Yeah, I think it's time for brands to kind of sit down in that psychology chair and have a chat. And actually, I'd actually, if my mom is listening, I'd say sorry, mom and dad, obviously that I didn't mention you guys, but Nelson Mandela, the good old Madiba, he's also a legend. So are you.
Amazing. Well, that's a great dedication. As a final call to action then, so everyone listening, if you check out the listing of this episode, we'll have links to everything we've shared. Hopefully the children's book that you mentioned earlier, Thomas, if you can share that link with me, to Goodvertising, to the hero trap and everything else that we've touched on.
The little pub in Copenhagen, for the sake of Emma,
Yes, yeah. Emma needs to know where this relatively cheap beer is for sure. So send that over. There are a couple of talks of yours that we've watched here recently. We'll link to those as well. But how else can people get more Thomas Kolster?
There's this little thing called Google, and you just you sort of start typing, and then magic things pop up. It's or in fact go with Firefox, because Firefox is provided by Mozilla, which is a non-profit organization that does a lot of great work around privacy and the internet. So Firefox it.
Good stuff. Don't Google it. Firefox it. Amazing. Well, thank you, Thomas, for joining us. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, Giles, and thank you for inviting me and sharing these thoughts, because I think ultimately it's important that we start thinking differently about leadership and stop creating brands that are the heroes in our lives, but actually make people the real heroes.
Totally agree. Absolutely. And thank you finally to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the podcast. We hugely value your support. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
To action, I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.